Hello, today is Wednesday, December the 31st, New Year's Eve. It is a cool morning, about 29 degrees Fahrenheit right now. I would like to today record the much anticipated and awaited book. This is not a book, this is an audio recording, of course. More of a condensed audiobook on living off the grid, the strategies of living off the grid. As you may know, I have already written and also made a podcast about the rationales to live off the grid. Those are basically your reasons to want to and go ahead with an off-grid lifestyle. I have spent considerable time and resources on that book and those recordings. I will put the links on the show notes or show description that you can find and go to. That would be a precursor to this recording. So I would highly recommend you go there and read or listen to that book, which is, again, Living Off the Grid, the rationales. That's book 1. So to begin, I'd like to just explain what this part of Living Off the Grid is all about, this recording, this book. These are basically, again, the strategies to an off-grid lifestyle to actually live off the grid. These are some steps, not all of them, of course. That would take a lot longer than this recording will be. But these are basically some of the strategies that I have thought about and also practiced over the last 10 years or so. Again, many of them are lived experience, practices, actions, decisions, trials that I have done over the years. And a lot of them work very well. Some of them don't work as good in many occasions, many instances. And some may or may not work exactly the same for you, of course. Every situation will be slightly different. Many will be very different. For example, depending on your global positioning, location, your home location, your site where you reside, your state, your city, the weather, the climate in your area may be a lot different than mine. So the strategies may vary, but a lot of them can be adjusted to your location. And I will try to also include several scenarios, locations, several situations, especially when it comes to weather conditions. So again, these are some strategies to actually live disconnected from the very harmful and abusive utility services that I have mentioned in the past, which are connections to your water service, connection to your food service or sources, connections to your energy, the providing of shelter, and also telecommunications. I will focus on those mainly because those are the most costly and therefore harmful, not only to your finances, but I believe to your health, to your freedom, to your likings, meaning your preferred way of life, the preferred things that you would like to be doing, are all hampered, are all harmed, I believe, by these connections, many of which are forcible, against your will, compulsory. All of these connections, many of them, most of them, I believe, can be attained freely, not only freely as far as cost, but also with your full control and will, without your will being forced or being cornered, being highly manipulated by the entities, I call them the entities that provide these services. And I will go through those. I have gone through those in depth as far as what those entities are, what services they provide, and how their services and the cost for these services are abusively high, not only high, but abusively so, and they again are harming your finances, your freedom of choice, freedom of expression, even your physical freedom. They, at the very least, curtail your physical freedom, the freedom to do exactly what you want with your time, with your resources, with your efforts, your money. They don't only curtail that, but they manipulate and force you to basically enslave yourself economically at work as a wage slave to provide those entities with a huge amount, a huge percentage of your wealth, your resources, your funds, and not only that, but your time. Over a lifetime, it's unspeakable the amount of resources and efforts and time and energy that you will provide, you will hand off to these entities. And living off the grid are, again, strategies to free yourself, mainly to free yourself free your time, free your finances, your economic resources, your time resources, your energy and physical material resources, freedom, and free yourself so you can use those as you see fit for you and your loved ones and your family and friends, people around you, even people far from you that you may or may not know so much. You can impact those people as well with greater control over your life. You will have more control over all of the resources that are there for you, that should be there for you, available, freely available, because you are a human being deserving of basic services and resources that are necessary for life, happiness, and comfort. Not only just life. You shouldn't have resources that are freely available only to keep you alive, like if you were in a life support machine. No, you should have resources freely available for you to thrive, for you to feel comfortable and happy, healthy, and to do and make and build with. So it goes beyond the very basics for life. It goes into health and happiness as well. Those resources should be available to you without you being forced to continuously and perpetually pay for them. So with that quick introduction, I will jump into strategies as to how to live a disconnected or off-grid lifestyle. I will skip over the definitions of what off-grid is, of what disconnected means, of what the utilities actually mean. All of that stuff, it's already included in my earlier precursor book and recording. Check those out so you can learn what the grid is, what the advantages of being off the grid are. There are many, and basically it took an entire book to go through those and the reasons why it is advantageous, hugely, immensely advantageous to live off the grid. And this is through not only reasoning, but also lived experience, not only by myself, but by many other thousands and thousands of individuals just here in this region of the world, the United States, but also around the world. Perhaps hundreds of thousands of people are enjoying the benefits, the freedom, the power of living off the grid. And I would like to share those benefits with you by telling you some of the strategies, some of the steps, some of the technologies that are required. And some of them are optional, but many of them are required to live off the grid. With that, here is the recording. Hope you enjoy, share, and like if it's something that you will value, and make sure that you do share with friends and family and others if you find it valuable. Thank you very much. Welcome back. I have organized this book into basic needs that people, humans, you and me have, and how to take care of those needs, to satisfy those needs while living disconnected from the grid. And those needs, of course, are a few basic needs. The most important, of course, we have a lot of needs as people, but I will list here the basic biological, physiological, and psychological needs that most of us have, that all of us have, I would think. And apart from air, breathing air, of course, is probably the most important resource that we need, the most important need that people have. You cannot go more than maybe a few minutes without taking a breath of fresh air, clean air. And as of right now, luckily and thankfully, that is freely available. It is so abundant and so basic that thankfully those people that would like to make money off of your needs haven't figured out a way to force you to pay for it as of right now. So I won't discuss that basic need. But the next most important basic need that people have is water. Drinking water, there's no need to explain why you need it. I mean, we're made of the thing, so we need to be consuming it, perhaps pointing to our fishy past, our fishy ancestry out of the waters. So we need to constantly be replenishing our bodies with water. As they said, we're about 70+% water content in our bodies. So we need a constant supply of clean water, and that should not be curtailed. That access to that water should not be curtailed by payments, money, funds, wealth, by your prestige, your social status, your nationality, by race, religion. Nothing should curtail your access to water. The water that you and I are made of and that we need to drink constantly has been here around long before we were actually a living organism. It has been here before life itself. Fresh water is fresh water. You can drink it straight from its source with very little, if any, harm through contamination, etc. It can be relatively easily cleaned and disinfected and filtered and consumed. Even water that is not perfectly clean could be consumed relatively safely. And your access to that should not be curtailed. It was, up until not too long ago, something that should not be charged for as a custom, basically as something that most people agreed with. But now that has changed. Water is considered now a commodity to be bought and purchased, especially here in places that have modern economies that have evolved to sell just about everything, to block access to it by selling it to the people that have the necessary funds to buy it, basically curtailing it, limiting it to only the people that have the funds to buy it. So you're cutting out whoever doesn't. And that is not only immoral, but sinful if you want to bring in religion and faith and all that. However, we have gone away from that. The merchants are in the temple, and they are selling basic life-giving needs such as water. And unfortunately, our access to water is even more limited, especially that of clean water. Those have been given away basically by our governments to multinational or large, bloated, corrupt corporations such as Coca-Cola, Nestle, Pepsi-Cola, and others. And those companies pay very little for large amounts of water, access, and to rights to basically sell it to you, while most of us, just mere residents, citizens, are curtailed, very heavily curtailed, even forbidden from taking water from bodies of water, natural bodies of water that people have nothing to do with, meaning that they have not built or made lakes, rivers, ponds, and underground wells or underground pockets of water, reservoirs. Those are largely off limits, especially in areas throughout the modern world. And that is outrageous. If you ask me, it's unspeakable. And we must demand to have the right to access that water, that life-giving water. You should not have to have a job and an income to live. Not having a job should not be a death sentence. And you should not have to depend on others that work and have an income to live. That's not only sinful, but immoral and outrageous in all kinds of ways. Think about it for 3 seconds. If you have any kind of reason, you will come to the same conclusion. You should not be sentenced to a death punishment because you cannot work and make an income. There is a repertoire of reasons why people will not, could not, and choose not to work and make an income. You may also work without an income. You may also work with very little income. You may also be exploited and get barely enough to where you can barely purchase even life-giving water. And that should not be a limiting factor, your income level or your ability to make an income to begin with. Again, if you think about it for 3 seconds with half of a brain, you will have to come to that conclusion. Otherwise, you are basically an ogre, a pig-headed, psychotic, crazed, sick monster that has no kinds of sympathy for any other person. And unfortunately, our modern economies are filled with these people where they have zero care to what happens to the next person, their neighbor, and they hoard and charge for everything they can so they can get a Maserati or a 6-bedroom mansion or a pool in their backyard. Greed has no limits, no bounds, seemingly, especially here in the Americas. So the first strategy to living off the grid with your water resource is to collect it, to gather it, to, as they call it, harvest it from nature. First and foremost, direct way to harvest water is through rain. Of course, rainwater is among the cleanest. It goes through a filtering process naturally when it evaporates and falls back to earth, especially if you live away from any kind of polluted city. Rainwater is the most clean source you can have. Rain falls throughout most of the habitable places on earth. You can collect it with simple items such as buckets, holes in the ground that collect water. You can collect them with just about any item that will hold water, that is watertight. You can expand on that, make the collection area of your water collector a lot larger, a lot more covering, that collects a lot more rain in less time, collects more water. If you live in an area that gets little rain, that's exactly what you want to do. You want to collect as much as possible in the short time that it does rain. And you could get intricate, you could stay simple, you can stay basic, and you can be very advanced. You can collect water from your home's roof through a gutter system to channel that water to a huge or large or even a medium-sized bucket tank. I myself had a 2,000 plus gallon collection tank, and I channeled my roof water, runoff water from the roof via a gutter and some piping right to that water collector. It stayed full. This area gets plenty of rain, and you can do the same. You can do something less, a lot smaller, collect less water. I collected too much water to where I was not able to use it because we do get enough rain here throughout the year in this area in the southeast US. And again, you can put out a bunch of 5-gallon buckets in one area, maybe about 10, 20 of them, open them up when it rains, and you probably will get enough water for weeks to months just with that one rain instance and collecting of that water. You can treat the water with basic chemicals such as chlorine, Clorox.
8 drops per gallon of unscented bleach.
Look that up online, see exactly what the treatment level is, the treatment strategy is with chlorine. You can treat it with other chemicals. Of course, very little chemical is needed because, again, you will be consuming that, so you don't want to overpower or contaminate that water with a bunch of chemicals, with a larger amount of chemicals. So you got to be very careful not to put too much chemical. You need just enough chemical to keep bacteria at a low level in that water so it can last a long time. Make sure that your containers are extremely clean as possible, and make sure you collect the water in an area that is not polluted by air pollution. Of course, when the rain falls, it's going to collect whatever pollution's in the air and stay in the droplets, and that's what you're going to be drinking. Of course, there are other strategies to cleanse that water, to filter that water. A simple filter could be just a cloth filter, just a piece of cloth, and just run the water through it and put it in a container as it goes through it. Of course, you would have to clean that piece of cloth. Several layers probably would be better, most likely will be better than one. The type of cloth, of course, matters, the thread count, how small the items that could pass through are, and of course, they got a repertoire of different types of filters that you can purchase. You can get with basic items. You can just have a sock or a few socks as a filter. You can have a few cotton t-shirts as a filter. You can get a lot more intricate and spend some funds and money on very advanced filters made from some stones or minerals. Salt is a good filter, I believe. Also, some minerals, like some stones, are good filters. So find out. There's too many types of filters to go through. There are also filters you can purchase, available from your local store, hardware store. Walmart, Home Depot, Lowe's, Ace have pitchers that you can filter water with. Of course, you have to spend money on the filters, but even then, even when you spend money on filters, it may be a lot less than spending money on a water connection. Cities and municipalities have found ways to charge very high prices for water, and they have been allowed by your government to do this. And there's very little most of us can do other than just petition and hope for the best with the way your government makes decisions. So the next best thing is to just cut off and not get a water connection, a utility water connection, usually from your city, your county, your municipality. And again, those are pretty high per my experience and per reports, very credible reports. I have put some of those in my last book about living off the grid, book 1, The Rationales. And per my experience, I remember paying hundreds of dollars every few months. I would say over $100 per month. And this was years ago. This was about close to 20 years ago now. I remember paying over $100 per month for water connection for a small family from the city. That in today's money probably would be about more than double that, maybe about $250 for a water connection at an apartment building. Let me know what your experience is with that if you do live in an apartment or other place where the water is painfully high in cost. But I'm willing to bet it's over $150 or more in a lot of places. mainly large cities, per month, which is criminal for a very basic need. And the water that you do get from them is usually not clean, not something you want to be consuming off the tap. It still needs to be filtered and treated before consumption. So a lot of people choose to just buy water, thinking that it is somewhat better or a lot better. But in fact, most of the water most people buy is straight from the tap as well. Maybe filtered, but straight from the tap. Like bottled water you get at Walmart and Kroger and other supermarkets is mostly from a tap somewhere and slightly filtered afterward. So don't think you're drinking pure water from those places. The next strategy for water being off the grid is to collect water from a body of water, meaning from a pond or lake or from a river. You can pump it out of those places right to your container, right to your home if you live close to one of those bodies of water. You can pump them manually. They have manual pumps. They have motorized pumps, electric or motored, meaning with a small combustion engine. Mostly electric is probably the best way to go. They have many quite durable battery pumps. Look them up online, and you can pump water out of those bodies of water. Of course, the water may not be completely clean. Some may be clean enough. So do some testing, check it out, do some trials, drink a little bit, see how you feel. Check the water out with a magnifying glass, look for particles, moving organisms. You may want to boil your water before consumption to kill off most of the living organisms that may be in there. You may want to filter your water, of course, before drinking it, especially if you get it from a body of water that has been collected there over time, usually sometimes with no flow. That's just a recipe for collection of contaminants. The bodies of water, especially in low places, especially around cities, are likely contaminated with motor oil or one of the many fossil fuel contaminants that are always on roads, on cities, on driveways, on the ground that's spilled from vehicles and other sources. They will eventually run into these water collection points in low-lying areas, ponds, creeks, rivers, lakes, and you can a lot of times see those with a film of sheen on the surface of the water, multicolored sheen, shiny surface. Stay away from that if at all possible. There may be ways to filter that out, clean it out, but they're quite costly and expensive, and you may not get all of it out of the water. So if you see contaminated water with films of oil, motor oil, and other types of contaminants, mold and foamy film on top of it, or crawling with life forms, you may want to leave that water source alone. Go to the next one. You can pump water out of these cleaner bodies of water and collect them in containers, whether it's tanks, bottles, containers of some sort. Make sure your container is, again, clean, durable, and preferably made of plastic. Plastic is many times tough and light, and it doesn't rust. There may be some metals that are suitable for collecting water, like aluminum and other metals such as brass or whatever else you may have available. Copper, maybe, as long as it is clean and also is spill proof, relatively safe to carry around and to store. Again, stored water should be treated, especially if it's not absolutely clean. Look for treatments, directions, options, and recommendations to make water potable or drinkable. Another option is to truck water in. If you have a pickup or any other kind of truck, you may go out into a body of water that may be away from you, collect the water, store it in a container, bring it back to your place of living. That is an option, and then clean and treat the water as needed. And that'll do it for strategies on how to live off the grid with water. There may be others. Look for the ones that work for you, depending on the area that you live. Of course, if you live in the high desert, it's going to be a lot more challenging to find, get, store, clean, and use water than if you lived right by the river where it rains a lot, or if you live close to where it snows a lot. Snow is water. It's just frozen. You just get a pack of it and let it thaw out, and it should be pretty clean. It's just like rainwater, more or less. And it may need just minimal cleaning, filtering, and treating. So again, depending on your area, your conditions, the climate where you live, is how challenging or easy it may be to collect, harness, and access and use water. And don't forget to petition your community government if the water is abusively high. Of course, there are strategies to lower your water bill use less water. But even when you use less water, a lot of places, they still charge you about the same. So make sure that you petition and protest when water is abusively costly. We'll pick it up in the next episode with the next basic need, with strategies for it to live off the grid and maintain access and use freely to that need or resource. Thank you very much. Another resource that you absolutely need to live, and also you need free access to all the time, you should have free access to all the time, is food. Tell me the last time that you spent more than a few days without eating. And if you did, how ready were you to do just about anything to find food and get that food? Almost nothing would probably get in your way to get that food, gather that food, and consume that food when you really, really need it. If you've never been very, very hungry, you don't know how critically important food is. But with logic and learning, as you know, food is extremely needed for not only life, but also a healthy lifestyle. Good quality food and access to it cannot be curtailed by your ability to work and produce and make money, your income level, your social status, and any other feature or any other trait that you may have that's utterly outside of your control. Even if it's within your control, you should not be curtailed to access food freely. Food has been here and will be here for a very long time, has been here since before life even began. Food is nothing but energy stored in a certain way, and of course there are many types of food that we can consume. Other animals are very specialized in consuming some types of food only. Carnivores, herbivores, for example. Some animals only can consume very small types of food, like whales, fishes. Some animals can consume only meats or mainly meats, like lions and big cats. You get the point. Food is there, has been there, and will be there outside of human intervention for eternity, as long as humans exist. And it has been there without the help of humans. And people cannot take it upon themselves to limit other people from accessing food.
People cannot take it upon themselves to limit other people from accessing food.
A life-giving, life-providing resource. Again, that is not only immoral, but it's criminal and sinful and against any reasonable and any kind of moral conviction. If you stop somebody from eating, you're basically attempting to end their life and livelihood. You're attempting to lower and curtail their health, their access to health. Therefore, you're attempting to kill that person in basic terms. And that should not be allowed. Somehow it has. In modern economies, food is extremely limited, even prevented from access by your ability to pay. And that should not be the case. Since that is the case in most modern economies, you have to gain that access back. At least you should, and you should want to have access to that life-giving resource that is there free for you. So basically there are people that want to stand between you and your access to food. And they have been doing that for generations now, with their hands stretched out into your face, asking you for funds for you to access the life-giving resource that is sitting beyond you and the person wanting to get funds from you for you to have access to that food. Think of it this way. A salesman is standing between you and a chicken with his hand stretched out, telling you that you should pay for that chicken because that chicken is in his territory, is in his land, belongs to him. He already ate chicken, and if you want to eat chicken, you have to pay him or her. That is the situation that you are placed in since birth, and you need to find ways now, or you should want to find ways to get out of that predicament to where you can have access to that chicken anytime you want, as it should be. Why? Because it is a life-giving resource, and your life should not depend whether you can come up with money or not. So first, growing food, plants, vegetables, fruits. It is a science. It is a skill that takes books to learn, of course, to perfect and to develop to a high degree. But most of us have the basic knowledge. Most of us that are developed adults especially have basic knowledge about the world and our environments, about how food is grown, how plants grow, how water, earth, seed could be combined. Basically, fruit-giving plant or food-yielding plant grow, and in time it will yield or bear fruits or seed or a root that you can consume that has the nutrients, vitamins, minerals that you need, such as a plantain tree or an apple tree, an orange tree, a lemon tree, grapefruit tree, a pineapple plant, a potato plant, a yucca plant or cassava plant. I mean, there are countless types of trees whose fruit, seed, and root you can consume, of course. You need to know about these. They have been passed down from generations since the beginning of time, and most of us should have the knowledge to grow plants. Most of us live in areas suitable for plant growing, yet we don't take advantage of it because we simply don't have the freedom, the space. Most of us don't have the knowledge, are kept from that knowledge, are discouraged from that knowledge, and that is a travesty that should change if you are indeed in that predicament, which is not only dangerous but also unhealthy. And bonding, meaning keeps you in bondage or as a slave to those that know how to grow the food and charge you to grow the food for you. The same thing goes with farming animals, pigs, sheep, rabbits, chickens, turkey. You can farm animals as well. Goat, sheep, again, animals that you can eventually consume after you slaughter them or harvest them, as they call it. And you should have access to these two types of food, plant and animal, which basically constitutes agriculture. You can learn to a high degree, become an expert, a professional farmer, agriculturist, botanist. You can grow food on the ground, on the earth, on other materials, on water. You could grow plants in your backyard, in an empty field. There is a lot of places where you can grow food, not necessarily your own land or land that you have purchased or owned. So do consider that. You don't necessarily have to own the land. You can borrow it. You can grow in a piece of land where there is no one there watching or living it or constantly guarding it. Again, there are many areas of the world where people live that you can grow food, all kinds of food. Depends on the area, of course. Depends on the climate, the weather, the amount of rain and sun that area gets. So you should study that, become familiar with types of food that you can grow, how to grow them. Won't go into details on how to do that. Plant the seed in the ground, basically. Wait for it to grow and pick the fruit or seed or root once it's ready. It may take months to over a year, sometimes more than a year, 2 years, to harvest fruit or seed from a tree, from a plant, or a root. But it is a lot more secure than depending on someone else's goodwill and someone else's acceptance of your funds that may or may not be there. You can farm animals for food. You can farm animals in your backyard, somebody else's land, rented land, borrowed land, some open field, open land with no ownership. You can hunt animals that are wild, that are living in the wild, that need no farming. They grow on their own. They multiply and grow on their own. You can harvest and hunt those animals. Deer, boar, or wild hog. There are many, many wild hog here in the U.S. and other parts of the world that are basically fair game, sometimes year-round. And I hear it's okay eating. It is pretty good eating. So check it out. Also, preserving food is also a skill you must learn because a lot of times you have to harvest more food than the one you can consume right away, more food than the one that you can readily consume. So you have to, that meat that is now dead and not being maintained fresh, you have to conserve it, preserve it. There are many ways to preserve food. In the past, there used to be spices and salts that were used. Now in modern days, it's mostly through refrigeration, mostly freezing. And for that, you need energy. You need to have access to a freezer or at least a refrigerator. That takes funds, resources, and energy to have and to maintain. So I will go into that a little bit later on refrigeration. You can keep meat under ice, not necessarily all the way frozen, but cold enough so it can last longer than perhaps a few days. But freezing the meat solid through removing heat from it with a freezer is the best and longer lasting option as long as you can keep that freezer running, which now with electricity is something that is a lot easier to do. Maybe it may be something that you choose not to do because it is so energy intensive, but it is an option. You may preserve your food with minerals such as salt, and you may go back to ancient techniques of preserving food with cinnamon and other spices. You may choose to do that. Check it out, find out about it, see how it's done, what you need to purchase, what items, what ingredients, spices, etc. And you should be able to preserve meat, especially. The strategy to have fresh meat is not necessarily the best, but a good strategy, I would say, is to let the meat preserve itself. Keep the animal alive, whether it's farm animals or game, and slaughter it, harvest it when ready to consume, shortly before, maybe less than a day or two before. I have seen other ways to preserve meat is also to dehydrate it, to let it dry, and you may want to find details about how to do that exactly. But I believe cutting the meat in thin slices or steaks and letting it dry out in the sun, given that you do have access to sunlight, warm sunlight, is one way to dry out the meat. Again, minerals may help the dehydration process and the drying of the meat. So find out about those details and good luck preserving of meats. Same thing with vegetables. There are ways to preserve the vegetables. Best thing is to consume as soon as you harvest or collect the vegetables and fruits, or shortly after. Refrigeration is one option, energy intensive option, and drying it is another option. But also by putting spices may be an option. I'm not really sure about that one. But the best option is to consume as soon as you harvest or shortly after. This applies again to fruits and vegetables. Fruits may last a bit longer since many times fruit have a protecting layer that preserves the inside, like peel or skin, they call it sometimes. And you may keep fruit around for days to sometimes weeks with no problem. So check out the details on how to preserve food such as veggies, fruit, and meats. I would like to discuss a few simple technologies to preserve food. First of them is the icebox, which of course would replace a conventional refrigerator, electric or gas refrigerators. There are LPG or propane gas refrigerators out there, in addition to the conventional electric plug-in refrigerator. So an icebox is nothing but a cooler, basically a container that is of course watertight and insulated. It would have to have some sort of insulation so it would hold the temperature better than just a simple container, likely double-walled and with some sort of foam or insulating material in between the walls of the container, more like a cooler. So an icebox refrigerator is nothing but a big cooler, a large cooler, where you can just replenish with ice. The ice would either be on the bottom, most likely, of where you store the food, where the ice sits on the bottom and the food sits on top, maybe with some sort of racking system or shelving system, like a grill, metal grill, or some other platform that readily transfers the cold temperature of the ice to the food being stored. So the only thing I can think of is basically thin plastic or metal. Metal, I believe, is probably more effective at transferring the cold temperature, and most likely a grill would probably be the best idea. And keeping your food there, of course, is not going to freeze the food. The food will only get as cold as the ice and no more than that. So it won't be cold enough to freeze, but it will be cold enough to slow down the decomposition process or preserve the food at least a day, 2 days, 3 days, sometimes even more if you keep the lid sealed shut for this icebox. Refrigerators back in the 1920s, 1930s, 1940s, and even the 1950s, a lot of them were ice boxes. That's where the term icebox comes from. It's basically a refrigerator. Sometimes they did look like a refrigerator, sometimes like a chest freezer, but a lot of times with sliding or swinging door refrigerator, single door, double door, and they had ice within the refrigerator. That's why they called it an ice box. There was usually an ice block that was delivered via service routine or daily service. Not daily, maybe perhaps every few days, every 3 to 4 days. there was an ice block delivered to your doorstep by a ice person or ice delivery person. That was their job, and you purchased this service for a monthly fee, weekly fee, however it was arranged. And this ice block was placed on the bottom of your ice box, which was basically an early kind or type of refrigerator. And you kept your food cool, not extremely cold or frozen, but cool. And you can do the same in modern times today. You can do the same now. You can have, let's say, a small refrigerator and just put ice blocks. It's kind of hard to come by ice blocks unless you have a freezer and freeze an ice block yourself. An ice block, of course, is going to last a lot longer, and its temperature, its cold temperature is going to be a lot longer lasting than a bag of ice, for example, that has ice nuggets, smaller chunks of ice, pebbles, whatever you want to call them, and the block is solid. It has no space in between the smaller chunks, so it can lose the cold or gain heat, so it lasts a lot longer. Of course, you have to have a way for that melted water to drain out. Sometimes you just collect it in your ice box, such as, when ice melts in a cooler, just the water collects on the bottom. The water stays cool, so it does help to keep the water in there, so the temperature is kept a bit longer if you do keep the water rather than draining it out. But of course, whatever's in there is going to be a lot more humid, so that's something else to consider. You may want to drain the water out if you want to keep your food slightly less humid and with less condensation, I guess, inside. But that is basically a primitive and basic electricity-less technology for refrigeration. And also you can consider a LPG or liquid propane gas refrigerator. They are out there. They're out there for sale, and you may consider one of those for purchase. Yes, they are a lot more expensive than your conventional plug-in electric AC power refrigerator, and they are a lot less available. You have to go to a specialty store, specialty seller or provider to get that. Usually online, you can have one delivered to you for a fee, so it's going to cost you a lot more. Last time I looked for one, it was a couple of $1,000 for one medium-sized LPG refrigerator. I've never had one, so I can't really tell you details about the operation and how well they work, perform, and last, how long they last. Any safety concern, I would believe there may be slightly more safety concerns with gas lines, especially if you keep it in your living area, such as your kitchen. You have to worry about gas lines and gas tanks, which are, of course, potentially flammable and even explosive. So those are all factors to consider for refrigeration. The next and last technology, basic electricity-less technology I like to discuss is the refrigeration method called the terracotta refrigerator, which are basically two terracotta pots. The terracotta pot is basically a pot made of terracotta, which is that material that is kind of like, it's a type of stone, but it's quite fragile. You can't tap it too hard. You can't let the pot fall. It'll break and shatter. So you have to get two pots, one large and one pot that fits more or less inside of the larger pot. And in between the two pots, you have to put a material such as sand, cotton, or any similar material. I've seen people probably where they use sand, thin gravel, and cotton. I've seen them use. Perhaps there are other materials, dirt, that you can use. It's a material that can readily soak in water and allow it to drain and evaporate. Terracotta also does soak in the water, and it does sweat and evaporate. That's why terracotta is used. I could see it used also with maybe concrete pots or stucco pots. That material readily absorbs water and allows it to evaporate. And the concept behind it is cooling through evaporation. Basically what refrigerators do to cool. They cool the air within the refrigerator and even the freezer by extracting the heat from that enclosure through evaporation, basically by allowing a liquid to evaporate and absorb that heat and release it. So for that, refrigerators of course have a series of high pressure valves that spray the ammonia or other chemical or other gas that it may be circulating through its system, which is basically a series of tubes. And as it evaporates, when it is pressured, when it is sprayed basically through this high pressure valve, it extracts heat, and that heat is then dumped by that same tubing on the outside And I have explained how refrigeration works. Do look for that video. Perhaps I'll put that link on the show notes for this show. But that's the same concept used in the terracotta pot refrigerator or cooler. It's more like a cooler because it extracts heat very slightly and it maintains a cool temperature, perhaps to be used for keeping vegetables cool, keeping items that need to be cooler than the outside temperature, than the ambient temperature. Not necessarily for keeping food cold or freezing. It won't work for that. And it also needs to be in hot and dry environments. That's where it works best. Humid environments, I've tried it and it does not work. And this terracotta pot, of course, there's a larger pot that goes on the outside, a smaller pot that goes on the inside, and in between you put the material such as sand, and you place the smaller pot within the larger one with the sand in between, of course, and it's going to allow you to have a small space all around with sand where you can pour water in and soak the sand in with water. I would try different amounts and see which amount works the best and check it out. You can build it within minutes if you have the correct materials and the pots. You can put a lid on the smaller pot where you put the food. You can line it with some sort of fabric or any kind of other material, plastic, to keep food clean and keep it cooler maybe. There are some materials probably that allow it to remain cooler. And voila, you have a basic electricity-less cooler where you can keep perhaps medicines if you live in a hot area, if you don't use air conditioning or don't have air conditioning available. These are all options. The icebox and the terracotta pot, those are both two electricity-less technologies that I wanted to discuss. And those are for food preservation. Another technology I'd like to discuss very quickly, actually I will leave that for the next episode because it deals with shelter. And here I'm focusing on food preservation. Thank you very much.